Thank you so much for tuning in, for watching. This is a re-record of a presentation I did on September 26th for Rocky Mountain Public Media. I wanted to talk a little bit about my creative process, I guess in broad strokes, and kind of break down the noise in my head and tell you through my more popular images how I get from that noise into a finished product. And just starting off with some basic examples. I've been very fortunate in my career to have a great deal of diversity in my work. I think a lot of photographers really hone into a specific niche, whether it be weddings or babies or product. And because of my desire to create and my constant drive to learn new things, and it's possibly been at my detriment, I don't know, but I haven't really fell into a specific niche other than calling myself a commercial and corporate photographer. So I've been able to do creative projects like this. I've been able to take lifestyle portraits a lot like this. And I've been able to be creative with product photos. This one was added pretty last minute at, at the request of my wife Elisa, who's featured in this image. And this was a spec shot that we did for the mask that she's wearing in this photograph. Now, I'm particularly proud of this image because we did it fast, we did it dirty, and it turned out really good, and the company used it for a very long time. And this was taken in a little spot in our garage, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet. Put some wood boards behind her, single light source, and the company loved it. They used it a lot throughout social media, had it on their website, I believe, for a while. And before this presentation, I went to their Facebook page to see when the last time was that they used it, and that was of November 2023, and I think that we took this picture in 2017, 2018. So really got a whole lot of mileage out of this, and that's particularly funny because they completely redesigned the look of the mask. So this picture was really no longer relevant, but they liked it enough to keep using it, to keep going forward with it. That feels really amazing. Going back into more landscape photographs, being able to just do what I want, to create when I want, to be able to work with friends and get a little silly, a little goofy. I'll talk a little bit about trust later. But it takes a lot of trust for you to ask your friends to do something wacky and for them to listen, knowing that something cool is going to come of your idea. This was a shot that I took for a music conference, and they granted me really creative freedom for all the pictures that they needed. And it really allowed me to stretch my creative muscles and do something a little bit different. So this is one of the images that I came up with. I thought it would look fun with all the music kind of coming out of this old book. And that old book is actually a 1937 unabridged Webster's Dictionary that will actually be featured later in this presentation as well. So I look back at my career and the diversity of images that I've created, and I think it all comes down to two words: what if? And I'd like to shout out Gary Hausholtz, who is an artist here in the Grand Valley, in my home valley. And he was the first person to teach me photography in high school and really allowed me to answer this question. Now, he would give an assignment and I would say, well, I figured that part out, but what if I try it this way? And I think I'm almost positive that he knew the answers to all of these what ifs, but he granted me the opportunity to figure it out for myself, to have this tactile learning through my own experimentation. And I can't thank him enough for that. So I was able to find some of my pictures from high school. And they're a little bit silly to look back at this point. Mostly the ego that I had, thinking I was very cool. But we all start somewhere, and it's a fun way to gauge my growth as a photographer. So starting with this image that was just a simple double exposure. I should also mention that these photos that I'm showing from high school were all done in film, developed in a darkroom. So I had to learn that. And I think that selectivity of working in film also shaped how I photograph now. Thinking in terms of, when you load up a roll of film, you get maybe 24 shots or so. So you really have to be selective. You really have to be deliberate in the pictures that you're taking. And now, of course, with digital, I think with my Hasselblad camera with a 1 terabyte hard drive inside the camera, I think it's like 4,000 pictures or something like that it's able to take. So just absurd, and nobody wants to go through that many pictures after a shoot. So that double exposure kind of led to an experiment with longer exposures and painting with light. And this one was a little bit simpler in terms of painting, just that I was flashing myself, or rather I think my dad was flashing me every time I got into a new position, say, okay, ready, and get another light. That led into a little bit more complexity with dissecting my body here. This is me on the far right side, and me splitting my body in half, taking a picture of my butt, because that is what high schoolers do, I guess, or at least in the 90s. Oh, that's a funny one to look back on, but again, shaped how I approach things today. So that got a little more complex into actual light painting, where I was able to paint my name with a flashlight and experiment with that and still try to balance out an image. And once we felt pretty comfortable with black and white film, that led into color film and trying kind of those same things and seeing how it's different. As in the digital age, there's no discernible difference in processing black and white versus color. But in the darkroom, it's a whole different animal. So here's a color image, me in a car in the front and back seat. After high school, or after this class, maybe more specifically, I realized that I would need to pursue a real job, a real career. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, even trying to post-process, I don't know why photography never seemed like a viable career path for me. So since my dad was a surgeon and had a private practice, it really only made sense for me to go into film school. So that's what I did. And I want to gloss over that a little bit, because the work I did in movies was a little bit more technical than creative. So there still was a lot of problem solving and a lot of great experiences, a lot of memorable projects. But the problem solving, again, is more technical than creative, and that's not what this presentation is about. However, I did find some photos from some projects that I worked on. And here is me. This is a film that we did about tea, and this is in Japan, just setting up some stuff and me being a little bit goofy for the camera. And for that same project, I wanted to include this picture. This is my friend Gordon. And one of the times we ended up in Taiwan for this film project, he wanted to bring this antique 8x10 camera. And when I say 8x10, if you can't tell from the picture, that means the actual size of the film that's being used, 8 by 10 inches. So it is a massive camera. It's antique, so it's solid brass, solid wood, even the tripod, solid wood. It is heavy. But we lugged that around, and in retrospect, I appreciate that much more now, because it's kind of do whatever it takes to get the shot that you want. And lenses that were designed at that time, anytime shooting in film, I think is just this beautiful depth. And there aren't very many still digital cameras that can produce that film feel. I think my Hasselblad is pretty darn close as I've ever seen, but still not quite the same as a camera like that. Here's a picture from a film that I got into props, I guess, a little bit, or wardrobe, maybe both, just being a little goofy. So if you've never been on a film set, there is a lot of time spent waiting for other departments to finish their jobs before you can go in and do yours. And that's just the way it is. There's one thing has to happen at a time. It's all sequential, and it just takes forever. So having a little bit of fun while we're waiting. This is from another film that, well, I think what was happening at the scene was that our main characters were going to a strip club to ask a stripper for help. So I think if this shot was any wider, I wouldn't feel comfortable sharing it in this particular format. But that's what the job is. So getting back into film career, or into my photography career rather, I wanted to get out of film because I felt a pull to be creative and be in charge of creative projects. There's so many variables in film, and the success or failure of a project, there's so many pieces that can cause that to cause a project to be successful or a failure, and I didn't like that as much. I really wanted to be in charge of my creative projects. This is not quite in chronological order, not a linear explanation, but I wanted to start with where I get inspiration. And I think it's a little bit unconventional, only because after doing this for as long as I have, I've been able to let go of my ego enough and think that there are other places that can inspire me. A lot of other entities, other creatives, but in particular, I get a lot of inspiration from younger people, from people who haven't been in this field as long as I have. So in the summer of 2024, I taught photography to a summer camp, and this was one of the images that a kid produced. And it was, of course, with my help, with my guidance, exchanging a lot of thoughts and ideas, but really pushing this particular student to go crazy, be creative. A person pictured is my friend Sierra, and they just happened to be wearing this delightfully wild outfit that day. So it worked out. But the lighting setup that we ended up with for this shot was a little bit different than what I normally get, or what I normally set up. That's just because the kid holding the camera she wasn't jaded by 20 years of doing the same thing. So I was so happy, so impressed with this picture that we came up with, that I used that same general lighting setup for one of my own photographs to photograph one of my musician friends, Eric, and came up with this photo. So it's a good reminder, working with the young people, that things don't have to be done a certain way, and that little nuance changes in camera settings and lighting changes can make a huge difference in the overall feel of the image. So I think most people probably couldn't tell that this lighting setup would be any different than what I normally set up, at least on set. So the inspiration doesn't have to be a one-to-one. It doesn't have to be with another photographer, another photo curious person. I don't do a lot of senior shots, but I love the creativity behind it. I don't know why I don't do a lot of I don't advertise for it. I don't know, but every one that I've done, I've had just so much fun with. I like including shots like this, the behind the scenes, because it looks so just delightfully chaotic. And it's hard to look at a shot like this and think you can come up with a shot like this. And I included this one because I wasn't super happy with how things turned out. In talking with the kid photographed, now he's very into metal, into that hardcore scene. You can see he's got some tattoos. He's leaning on a cane with a skull. So we were talking before the shoot, and I was trying to get an idea of what he's into, and I thought, smoke. We got to use smoke on this. And I didn't want to use a smoke machine because that lingers, but dry ice, that smoke dissipates very quickly. So I'd never used dry ice in a scenario like that, but I thought I could wing it. I thought I could figure it out. And the biggest thing I learned is that once the water cools down from the ice, you can't just put another block in there. It doesn't work. You have to refresh the water, put warm water in ideally. So I had to pivot a little bit, but it taught me a great lesson. And at the end of the day, they were happy with the pictures that I came up with. So I guess everybody wins. I get some new knowledge and they get some pictures that they're pretty happy with. This is another setup for a senior shoot. I love this one because of the apparent, through my perspective, the apparent roller coaster of emotions that mom and the kid went through during this. So, as I alluded to, it's really important for me to talk to the kid for any senior shoot to get an idea of what they're into, what they like, and try to cater the shoot, the scene to them. We do some shots that mom or grandma want to have on their mantle, the very, very simple headshots, but I want to showcase what the kids are at that time in their life. So I was talking to this girl, saying, well, what do you like? What are you into? And she was saying, well, I'm really into books. I like reading. I like Lord of the Rings. I say, whoa, stop right there. I love everything that you just said. Elisa, my wife, and I like to collect old books. And this is maybe 5% of the books that we have in our collection. But I absolutely love the smell, the feel, the look of old books. So I said, well, we have all these old books. Let me set them up behind you. It'll look like you're in a library and we can go from there. She says, great. I mentioned earlier that there was a dictionary that was going to be featured again. And next to the clock on the upper left, that is the full size of the unabridged 1937 Webster's Dictionary. Just massive. Okay, but going back to the shoot, I loved it because I had this idea in mind, knowing that it was going to work. And whatever idea mom and daughter had in their head, it felt like they walked into my house and saw this. I didn't set this up in studio because I'm not bringing that much stuff outside of my house. It's just ludicrous. So they walk into my house and my perception was that they saw this and were like, what's going on? But you get the lighting set up, you get the camera set up, and you end up with a picture like this. And she gave me the best reaction of anybody that I've ever shown a photograph to. This is something that sticks with me. Anytime I feel like I'm having a hard time dealing with a client or feeling like I'm not good enough, it's important for me to show the back of the camera to my clients to make sure they leave knowing that we got something good. And that's especially fun because that's the raw photograph. It's only going to get better from there. So anyway, I take a few of the pictures, I show her the back of the camera, and she gives me this response. I'll have to put down the microphone. And it makes me so happy every time I think about it. So that is where I get my inspiration from. I think one of the best things I did for my career was train myself in visualization. And what I mean is creating a shot in my head and learning how and what it takes to turn that into an actual finished shot. And I think a lot of that process was getting in over my head and not knowing how I was going to complete something, but knowing that if I just did one step at a time, just trying to chisel away at the project, that it would be completed, I'd learn something, hopefully it would be good. This process was done with a selfie series that I created. And I'll start by showing you this one. This is a guy, but happens to be me, but we'll say it's just a guy traveling with his friendly cactus, looking off into the sand dunes. And I think it's going to be a sunset. We'll call it a sunset. Learning how to take all these elements and put them together, physically, it was very challenging, but trying to teach myself through visualization that anything at my disposal, anything around me could be taken and photographed, manipulated in certain ways to look like something else. And that's not just manipulation through Photoshop, that's manipulation through camera settings, through lighting, through the actual photo taking process. And then Photoshop just kind of cleans everything up after that. So here's a breakdown of this image. So on the bottom, the completed image, on the top, all the elements that went into that photograph. Well, you can see, maybe you can't tell from this, but the sand dunes that are in the final photograph are actually just a fleece blanket that I laid on the bed in a certain way. I just kind of letting it fall until it fell in a way that looked like a mountain to me. And the sand that I'm standing on in the final image is just white table salt. Again, manipulated in a way to kind of match the color of the sand dunes. A cactus is small, desktop size, but even the scarf had to be manipulated a little bit. I had the idea that an industrial fan would be strong enough to blow it away from me, like in the final image, but it wasn't. So I actually had to photograph the scarf in a couple different ways to make it all come together. Here's another image from that series, T-Rex Rodeo, obviously. With this one included in the visualization, I had to do a little bit of pre-planning and think about what I could do to get the shot. For many years, I was the photographer for the Mesa County Fair, and part of the fair is a rodeo, like actual bull riding rodeo. And I knew that I was going to be taking that. It's always fun. I love taking pictures of bull riding, but I knew there was going to be a big crowd, lots of people there. It was going to be towards the end of the day, so lighting was going to be great. And I put that in my plan for this shot. So all these people in the background became kind of unwilling participants in this particular shot. Of course, in the final image, they're blurred. You can't identify anybody. But here's the breakdown. Again, final image on the bottom, breakdown up on the top. And yeah, you can see all the people there in the stands. The dinosaur is just a toy, a model that I got from a hobby shop. And to get my body position right, I'm just laying on my coffee table in a way that I thought would look pretty close to somebody falling off of a dinosaur. and then manipulating the PBR logos with T-Rex Rodeo. And then the only change I really made to the dinosaur itself, I think it looks really good, but the plastic painted eyes I didn't like, so I swapped those out with real cat's eyes. And I think it's such a subtle thing, but it gives it just a little bit more life. And I really like that. So that visualization, seizing opportunities as they present themselves. The one more image I want to share from this selfie series, and this kind of goes back into inspiration as well, as I wanted to do this selfie series. I don't know the order of operations here, but fairly early on in my selfie series, I became acquainted with a photographer, John Wilhelm. And he was doing these really fantastic portraits, mainly of his kids, it's really cute daughters, and doing things that were almost cartoonish manipulations. They were beautiful photographs, really incredibly clever. And he ended up giving me a little bit of support, a little bit of inspiration. My images for my selfie series, I wanted to have a little bit more air of reality to them. And I realize I'm saying that sitting next to an image of me riding a walrus, but through all these images, I want you to look at them and think, even if it's just for a second, like, wait, is that real? So I bring up John because the photograph of the walrus was actually his. And it's from a museum somewhere in like Denmark or something, I don't remember. But he said, take this image, do whatever you want with it, go nuts. So of course, I'll take it. I'll do something nuts, show it to him, get some feedback, go from there. So this is the breakdown of that image. This time, finished image on the top, breakdown on the bottom. This didn't have a lot of elements to put together, but we have the walrus, and me, to get that feel like I'm on the back of the walrus, was just straddling the arm of the couch and folding the map up a little bit on the cushions. Yeah, learning how to put things together, seizing opportunities as they present themselves, and accepting help from other people who maybe have some more experience than you do. So moving on to iteration, I think one thing that's kept me safe, at least in my own mind, is doing iterations of images when I have an idea. I want to do it on my own, to not waste other people's time, but to also try to limit any kind of embarrassment on my own. Now, if I mess up, I don't want other people to know. So, for a while, I had this fascination with levitation photos. I started off with this. And this was just something I did in my house, a very simple shot, trying to be a little bit goofy, but just reaching a bottle of wine from the top shelf of this bookcase. I felt like I did pretty well with that. It looks pretty realistic to me, so I wanted to up it just a little bit more. So I got Elisa involved. This was a little bit more consequential because somebody else involved, on location, a very specific time of day, and I think we nailed it. Had really kind of created this really cool image of her drifting off into the sunset, and I love that. And then to do that with a little bit more consequence, this was under time constraint. This was, again, for a music conference where the creativity element of it really was inconsequential to how the image was being used, but I wanted to create something entirely different, something that would really stand out. And that led to probably my more popular image, an image that's been shared around the world, published around the world. Yeah, just an image that I'm very proud of, which was my engagement shot with my wife, Elisa. And this was also a good point of embarrassment where my iterations, trying to ramp things up and get it more complicated, didn't quite keep me as safe as I had hoped. So what we did, going out on location, tied some balloons to her. She was going to lean over that ladder, which I felt a little bad about because it was uncomfortable, but she was a good sport. I felt even more bad about it because when we got engaged and wanted to put out announcements, I think her first thought was, well, we'll do a simple, cute portrait of ourselves. And I said, well, let's ramp it up a little bit. Let's do something a little crazy. So she agreed, maybe a little reluctantly, but we did this. And I think, well, this is a behind the scenes image, of course, but I think my first attempt looked something like this. I didn't realize until I got home that the focus was a little bit off. And I tried some different techniques, tried to get it as sharp as I needed it to be, but it just was not working. It's really hard to go to a client and say that you messed up and we need to redo something. It's arguably more difficult when you have to go to your fiance, in this case, and say, I messed up. I know this wasn't your favorite thing to do, but can we do it again? Fortunately, she said yes. It gave me a chance to change a couple of things about the image, including making sure that focus was where I needed it to be, and ended up with an image like this. Something that I'm super proud of. I still have it on the desktop of my computer in my office. And as I mentioned, it was published around the world, including in an article in a Chinese magazine where they said, this is what Photoshop is for. And I love that. Yeah, it made me feel really good. So moving on. Deliberate. And when I talk about being deliberate, I think that means a lot about pre-planning. It's about the visualization, it's about producing, about finding everything you need to get the shot together. It's about finding people who are like-minded in the sense of being weird and creative, but not just being sycophantic yes friends. And I think a lot of photographers end up taking just kind of a spray and pray approach where they take hundreds of pictures and they pick the couple that they like. And I assume that maybe sometimes there are none that they like, or the pictures, just the ones they choose, are a little bit subpar, not up to their usual standards. For me, because of taking this approach of starting with the what if and being deliberate and the visualization, oftentimes I know exactly what I want, exactly what I'm going to get. So when I get that photograph in a session, I want to stop. And for my own projects, that's very easy. But there's been many times where in order to feel like a client is getting their money's worth, I will take more images. And I know that this is the shot that we're going to use. I know this is the one that's the best, but I'll just snap a few extra frames just to take up more time. I maybe shouldn't be admitting that, but there we are. Here's a shot I wanted to include because of being able to advocate for myself and produce this image in such a short period of time. This was all produced the day of. I had a client that is a musical instrument manufacturer, and they needed a shot like this. This is kind of what they described and what we came up with in discussion. And they needed it that day because that image was going to be printed on roughly 50,000 flyers to be included in instrument cases for all new purchases to advertise for whatever they were advertising for. So this is what we want. Can you do it? Yes, I can. Can you do it today? Yes, I can. And I had the confidence to do that and the conviction to convince them. The hardest part here was that is my kid, and he did not want to do this. Neither of the kids that were home wanted to do this. and we didn't have time to try to cast anybody else. So the hardest part, yeah, just trying to convince your own kid to help you out with a project like this. But really happy with it. Kind of along those same lines of dealing with a client and being having conviction in your own results. I don't have an image to support this, but sharing an anecdote about a project that I got involved with. A national magazine approached me wanting to do a story on a festival that we have here in our home valley, a peach festival. We decided to break it down into 2 shoots. The first shoot was going to be for the cover of the magazine for that month. And the second shoot was then going to be me walking around the event and taking pictures from a shot list that they had. When I delivered the picture that I thought was going to be the cover, the person I was dealing with completely ripped it apart. They shredded it to pieces to the point where it felt like it was almost getting personal. And I think I had a choice there, either to break down and apologize or stay true to what I knew was a decent image. Now, the in that he gave me was at the end of the email saying that he hasn't shown it to his art team yet, but he feels like maybe he shouldn't. So I said, well, hey, before we schedule any reshoots, show it to your art team, and at the very least, they'll be able to give us some constructive criticism about what's going to look good on the cover. He said, okay. Gets back to me a couple days later, and in a very terse email, says, the art team loves it. It's going to be on the cover. I don't think if I had that kind of conviction with my image, that would have ended very differently. And I would have let somebody else win. When I realized the subjectivity of art just caters itself to interactions like that. But I'm glad it worked out in my favor. When I first mentioned about being deliberate and doing the pre-planning, I mentioned finding friends who trust your artistic process. And I want to talk a little bit about another composite image. This is one, most of the times when I build a composite image, I start from the background and work forward with the different elements. I find that a little bit easier to make things blend together. So if you start with a background, then you can take that lighting and kind of cater to all the other elements, kind of mimic that lighting, mimic those camera settings. It's just easier than working the other way around most of the time. So this was a shot I was creating for Valentine's Day. And this is very benign, very normal. But here's the trust part. This is my friend Kevin. And I think it takes quite a lot of trust to convince a grown man to wear a diaper and butterfly wings. He did it, no problem. Didn't know what the shot was going to be. Just asked him to do this, pose like this, take the image like this, but put those elements together and you get this, which I think is just a delightfully fun Valentine's picture with grown man Cupid. And I'm very happy with that image, very proud of it, because aside from being in my mind a good image, it's my friends willing to participate in something getting a little weird. I want to show off a little video about what it takes to be purpose-driven in a shot and do that pre-planning, where I really want to take as much time as I feel like I need to get the shot that is worthwhile. So this is me setting up in my office. I'm clearing up from a previous shoot, and I'm just setting things up for the next shoot. So got to start by changing out the backdrop. Gets pretty wrinkly, so I got to steam it. For this particular shot, I didn't feel like it needed to be completely smooth, but I didn't want those folding squares. Thought that would be a little distracting. and setting up the props and setting up the lights. And anytime I'm getting ready for a shoot, I want to be roughly 80% of the way there before the client shows up. And then that last 20% is just little tweaks based on, their size, skin tone, wardrobe, posing, all that stuff. So this particular setup, this particular shot was for a granny, effectively in her mid-80s. And we thought this was going to be her last Christmas and wanted one more Christmas portrait to showcase who she is, to remember her by. And I thought that was really sweet. So, of course, I wanted to put a lot of effort into it. And this is the shot that I came up with. And this was an absolute sweet dog, a retired but a former therapy dog. This dog was in rough shape, very immobile, had to take off her diaper to not show it in the shot. The tongue is always out and had a lot of discoloration on it. I had to Photoshop that a little bit, and tear stains on the eyes, Photoshop that a little bit. And at one point I thought, well, why don't we move her closer to the edge? I think it'll look really cute if the paws are kind of hanging over the edge like that. And so we moved her, tried to be careful about it, but then she started sliding forward, and in a slow motion way that kind of defied gravity, just kind of slid forward and boom, off the chair onto the floor. And it was a little heartbreaking, but she was okay. And I think we came up with a very good picture to remember her by. I said with composite shots, it's often best to work back to front. Now I'm going to dissect a shot that I went in a slightly different way. I knew that I wanted to use fire as part of the elements in the photograph, but I had never really worked with it before. Certainly not in a way that I was constructing my own elements. A big difference between photographing a campfire or a fire on a stove versus creating a background from it. So I started with this to make sure that it would work, so I didn't get myself in too deep. This is just some cotton balls on a nail doused in lighter fluid or something like that, something flammable. And creating those elements, getting those all together, and I was very happy with that. So I moved on to the next part, which was setting up lighting. Once I felt like the lighting was in a good place, I could start photographing the individual elements. That started with my umbrella. Once I was happy with the umbrella, move on to the body. And once I was happy with that, I could put them all together and end up with an image like this. If you get really lucky, there will be a company that is sponsoring your project and will turn it into one of their own marketing images and end up with something like this. This is for Left Hand Brewery, based out of, I think, Longmont, Colorado. And they wanted to use this image for their Nitro month. They use it on social media. Now, this was mostly a mock-up that they came up with, but I thought we could do just a little bit more. So I took bottles of their nitros, their milk stout nitro, and I put it within the flames, the flames that are dropping down throughout the image. So it's a very subtle thing, but I like looking at that, and every time you look at it a little bit closer, you see another detail. And that's what I kind of go for, is finding hidden elements inside of a picture. I wanted to share a recent image with you. So a while ago, I got this idea in my head that I wanted to create a stage. And it was going to be a mini stage with lighting on it that was almost an antique looking floor lighting, and use that for shots. And I had a vague idea in my mind of what those shots could look like. The key element was the stage that could be put in different ways, could be manipulated in different ways and look different in different scenarios. And it did kind of get a little more complicated when I figured I could take it out of studio and use it in the wild like this. And this particular shot was a little bit different, but it was figuring out how to wire, an inverter to my car so I could power it and all those things. I got this idea with my musician friend that there was kind of this dichotomy between what she was looking like and what the surroundings would look like. And it really doesn't have anything to do with looking like a true performance, just really isolating her. And I thought the light coming up from below could create this kind of powerful, almost sinister shadow on her and make her pop in the surroundings. And then I could offset that by using additional lighting, both like behind over her shoulder and above her. So yeah, this is a background shot, really more showcasing the stage than anything else. And when we got her on there, this was just a background shot taken showing some different posing that we were going through. And here's another shot where I'm directing her. I think what I'm saying at this point is I'm trying to demonstrate to Faith that the efficacy of a karate chop is better this way as opposed to this way. That's important stuff in posing. But then we put all those things together and we end up with a shot like this. And I think this is going to be the shot that she's using for her newest album upcoming. And one of the things that I really liked about this particular shoot was that there was a lot of collaboration going on. It was me as the photographer, it was her as a musician, and my friend Jeff Bates, who's a metal worker, sculptor, a very, very talented artist as well. So 3 very different artists working together, trying to solve a problem, but coming at it from different places. And I really like that a lot. I think that kind of collaboration really can produce amazing pieces. I realize that most of what I've been talking about is portraiture, but these same kind of principles are also applied in my mind to landscapes. There's fewer people involved, of course, but there's still that pre-planning, it's the same visualization. And I wanted to start off with a picture that so far has been a failure in my book. And to preface it just a little bit, I started with going on a bike ride on some of our local trails and coming across this vista and just thinking, oh my gosh, that is absolutely gorgeous. If I come back in the fall where the leaves are all changing, this will just be absolutely gorgeous. And that was in the fall of 2023, just a little bit too late for me to take the photograph. So I had to remember it, I had to write it down, I had to do whatever it took to think about the timing of showing up there in 2024. So that's what I did. And I went to that property, that viewpoint 3 times. It's a mile walk out, a mile walk back. And I went out there 3 times trying to take a photograph, only to be disappointed each time. And I wanted to share a couple of those disappointing photos. This is one of them. I think this was the 3rd one that I took, where I finally decided that in my mind, I thought it would look best as a sunrise picture over our valley. And not realizing until this that with a clear day, with the full sun shining, it's going to be too contrasty against the trees that are in the foreground. So what I really need to do is wait until the end of the day as the sun is setting. And that's in a little bit of a valley, so I have to be very careful about what time of day that actually is. But it's this beautiful vista looking along the Colorado River. But going down that river, I wanted to see all these cottonwoods just lined the river with their yellow leaves, and then showcasing our mountains, the Book Cliffs and the Grand Mesa. Didn't quite work out, but I'm ready for 2025, and that's coming up very, very soon. Here's the first image that I took. And I think it's a little bit closer to the final project final product, but it still wasn't quite right. I was a little bit early. I got rained out, and at this point, because it was so cloudy, I didn't realize the effect on the trees with the early morning sun versus the late afternoon sun. Now, one of the questions that I got asked in my original presentation was, well, why wouldn't you just get an image close and then Photoshop it? And I think that's a valid question, because I do feel very competent in my Photoshop skills, but I also take a lot of pride in getting a photograph right the first time, getting it right in camera, and then using Photoshop to just do light manipulations to make it, to take it from 90% to 100%. Aside from that, there are limitations in photo manipulation. I mentioned with my selfie series that I want things to have an air of realism about them. I very much want that in all my photographs, whether it's a portrait or a landscape. So although I would be able to go in and change the color of these trees and make them more yellow, I run the risk of processing the pixels so much that they start falling apart. And I don't want that to happen. I would rather wait 2 years to get the right photograph than feel like I'm making digital art. These trees are about ready to turn again, and I am paying close attention. And I've learned what time of day I need to wait for. As I'm alluding to, all it really takes to make a good photograph is paying attention and following that what if idea. Like looking at the scene and thinking, well, what if the sun was in a different place? What if there was rain or snow? What if? And sometimes you just pay attention. And what I realized is that close to my house right now, certain time of year, certain time of day, just north of the river, you get this nice blanket of fog. And so I thought, well, if I can get above the fog at sunrise, then I will end up with a photograph like this. And I think this is just a very unusual photograph for the valley, our home valley, and really just beautiful in the color gradient. So very happy with how this turned out. Although I had to get up before sunrise and hike up a hill before sunrise. And sometimes these shots just require patience, knowing that something is going to happen, but you don't really know when. That's how you get a shot like this, where happen to be out in the desert at sunset, and there just happened to be a storm coming through just off to, in this case, the right of the sunset. And there was some intermittent lightning. And I knew if I could get those three elements together, it would create this really great panoramic landscape shot. So including storm, lightning, sunset, something very unique. So a little bit of patience, fortunately, with some people that were willing to be patient with me. It's beautiful out in the desert at sunset. So fortunately, not a big twist of the arm to say, hey, let's just wait a little bit longer, and I think I can get something really cool. Again, with patience, sometimes it's not about waiting in a large open desert. Sometimes it's about waiting for the perfect time in a canyon. This was a picture that I took in Zion National Park, walking along the trail. And this is the sun just cresting over the top of the canyon. That's practically midday because you're down in a hole. But walking along and seeing that, oh my gosh, in a few minutes, the sun is going to crest over this little nook in the mountain, and I think it's going to look great. And I love how this turned out, because it created a lovely color gradient and this really harsh silhouette of the texture of the mountain. And very happy with that image. And I want to talk about the iterations that I went through for one of my latest series, which was a 3D stereoptic series, but talk about how it started. I had this idea that I wanted to do something very, very different. A lot of my images were getting more and more complex, and I wanted to almost do the antithesis of that. So I thought, okay, well, let's play with a lot of negative space. Let's play with lighting and texture. And so what I came up with was, we're going to take pictures of some local plant life, and it's going to be really high contrast, going to be black and white. And I can print them up really big and look nice. Kind of almost a corporate art feel to it. Hopefully a little bit more creative than most corporate art. So this was the first image from that. This is the second image. And after I took the second image, I realized that this would be a fantastic opportunity to make them stereoptic. What stereoptic means is that there's a right photo and a left photo taken from slightly different perspectives, and when you look at them the right way, they become three-dimensional. Some of you may realize that, or make the connection with the handheld devices that maybe your parents or grandparents had, where you'd put a little postcard in and look at it and view them in 3D. My parents had one. They still do. And I still love it. I love the concept of taking still images and making them three-dimensional. That was something that I've had an interest in for so long. And then in roughly 2012, 2013, I decided that I would try them myself and figure out that process to make photos in 3 dimensions. And I made a couple images that would fit into that viewer, little postcard size, like 7 inches long by 3 inches high or something like that, really small. And I figured that out. I made some images, but I didn't at that point realize how I could commercialize any of it. I thought it was kind of just a fun gimmick, and nobody would want to view anything like that anymore. At this point, for this series, I realized, doing a lot of research, that I could print things up gallery-sized and have them be viewed 3D. I found a modern company that makes viewers where you can view things. I don't know if there's a limit to how big they can be, but everything from an iPad to big gallery art, you can view them in 3D. So I got that, and I got to work seeing what I could do. So I made a couple of the images. I started over from this iteration to make 3D stereoptic, seasonally relevant 3D images. It's still in black and white at this point. I got a Hasselblad H2D, which was a tremendous upgrade from my Canon 1DX Mark II. And immediately seeing the clarity and the color difference from the Canon to the Hasselblad, I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to start this over again for the second time, because these images will be so much better, so much cleaner, and forget about that black and white stuff. The color response on this Hasselblad is just, I have to showcase that. So I started over. I started over with a new camera. I started over with the colorized images, and as I mentioned, they're all seasonally relevant. So I have a stereotypically winter scene, fall, spring, and summer, and I wanted to stay true to that. So it was a process of a full year to create the series, and then with those other iterations, another year before that. So 2 years to create the final images that I have now. This particular setup that's on screen was for PPA magazine, Professional Photographers of America. They were gracious enough to be interested in this series and want to showcase it in their March 2025 issue. So because they wanted some backgrounds behind the scenes images rather, I created a shot just for the magazine. And this is me waking up before dawn on a cold day to mist this rose branch and slowly create icicles on it. Once the icicles reached a certain point, I took some pictures and ended up with this. I am very, very happy with how this image came out. Some great color, some great texture to it. And if you view it correctly, it's in 3D. I'll leave this up for a minute. You can try, depending on the device you're watching on, if you cross your eyes, you'll be able to see a third image appear in the middle. And that image will be in 3 dimensions. Kind of like looking at the magic eye photographs from the late 90s. I guess you can pause the video as well to give it a try. Here's another image from the series, one that I like a lot. This was my springtime image from a local tree. I just loved the color and the texture on this one, and the gradient of the light where it kind of fades off, falls off as it goes to the bottom of the screen. I'm really happy with this one. And here are the 4 images together, starting off with winter, spring, summer, and fall. And actually, I guess I could mention these have been hanging up in a gallery, but the gallery is now closed. So if you're watching this, have access to a gallery, these are looking for a new home, let me know. I want to end with going back to my film career. As I mentioned things being a little bit more technical rather than creative, which is fine. But I did work on a lot of projects that were very meaningful, very inspirational to me. And one of those projects that probably meant the most to me was this, the film Sing Your Song with Harry Belafonte, a biography of him talking about his life. I worked on this film for about 7 years. That wasn't full-time. That was breaking it up a couple different shoots a month or so, but for 7 years. So throughout that time, I felt like I got to know Harry very well. His stories, of course, but also chatting with him personally, getting to know who he was. If you don't know who he was, well, he was a civil rights activist, an actor, a singer. His album Calypso was the first album ever to sell over 1 million copies. So, an incredibly successful artist. This is not my picture. This is a picture from the New York Times. I believe it was dug up and published after Harry died in 2023. But this is Harry with Martin Luther King Jr. As I mentioned, Harry was a very big part of the civil rights movement, and he personally funded a lot of what Martin Luther King Jr. was doing. So without his generosity, without his passion, Martin Luther King, it could have been very different. So this was obviously taken before my time. But this is how I knew Harry. I don't know who took this photo. I wish I could give them credit because I think it's phenomenal. A great portrait. This is from an article in USA Today. I think it was pulled again after Harry died in 2023. So if you took this photo, happen to see this video, let me know because it's just great. But I wanted to talk about Harry in particular because it taught me a lot of firsthand perspective of the civil rights movement, but also because I considered Harry a friend. And he unwittingly was a part of probably the most influential interaction I've ever had with anybody. That we were working on this film, and I had known Harry for a while at this point. That the director and the camera guy, who were a little bit older, a little more experienced than me, had this kind of frantic way about them, getting everything set up, before Harry shows up on set, and they said to me, "Oh, Harry's going to be here. Let's go. We got to get a microphone on him. Let's go, 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 go." And this frantic energy just transferred into me, and so I grabbed the gear that I needed and went over to Harry when he showed up. And first time seeing Harry for the day, Harry, we got to get this mic on you. We got to go. And he completely diffused that frantic energy. After I said that to him, he looked at me for a second. He smiled. He held out his hand and he said, "Good morning." I think it took a while for that to sink in. It wasn't immediately, but I think a little bit of context too, in that even at 80 years old, when I knew him, he was still an incredibly powerful presence in a room. He still commanded the attention. You could still feel the energy shift in a positive way when he came into the room. And just having so much of this power about him and being able to diffuse that frantic energy that I brought over to him was incredible. And I think about that often, that interaction, in terms of my work, that I don't need to create at other people's speed. I just need to be me. And there is always time for pleasantries. There's always time to be kind and nice to people. And that's something that he'll never know. I never got a chance to thank him for that interaction. It's so simple, so little, probably just a little blip on the radar for him, but incredibly powerful for me. And I will love Harry forever because of that. That is the end of the presentation. This QR code will take you to my website, although I'll include a link elsewhere too, in case you're watching this on your phone and can't take a picture of the QR code. But one of the other questions that I get often that I want to address in this presentation is the idea of using AI. There are a lot of visual artists who feel threatened by it, who feel like it's taking work away from them. And I see that a lot. Different AIs that, of course, can generate images, AI that can take your image and put it in a different spot. For a product image, for example, you take a picture of a shoe and it'll put it, I don't know, somewhere more meaningful than your kitchen counter. I happen to love AI, and I use it quite frequently. And I think it's important to delineate between the ChatGPTs and Claudes and realize that AI is just becoming more and more ubiquitous. But I'll take you through how I use it. My Hasselblad has a face detection feature on it, trained with AI. So if I'm taking a portrait, it'll find the face and it'll focus on that. It's 90% of the time, that's where you want the focus to be anyway. And I have found that because of that feature, I'm throwing away almost no images that are out of focus. Whereas before, I would have to focus and then adjust and focus and adjust. And it wasn't as accurate as it is now. So it's made me much more efficient in my capturing of an image. Make me feel like everything that I'm getting is worthwhile, that I'm not going to have to throw anything away. After I take the pictures, I bring them into Lightroom, which, if you are not familiar with that program, it's another Adobe product. I like to think of it as pre-Photoshop. That's a program that I use to sort and color correct and crop my images. They have some pretty hefty AI systems coming through Lightroom now. For example, if I take a photo of a group of people, it's very challenging to light them evenly. So I can go into Lightroom, it'll identify all of the people in that group, and I can say, well, the skin on their face needs to be a little bit lighter, or the light in their eyes needs to be a little bit lighter, or their hair, or their lips. It separates all of those things automatically. And it does so with a great deal of accuracy. I think where I benefit from it, and understanding the limitations of AI, is that I learned how to do all of this stuff manually. So if AI makes a mistake, which it still does on occasion, I don't have to fight with it. I can go in and make those changes by myself. It just takes a little bit longer. After going through Lightroom, sometimes I will need to bring photos into AI for a little, or into Photoshop for a little bit of cleanup. And the AI systems there have become pretty incredible as well. In particular, the ability to remove items from a shot. If there's, let's say, like a stray cat walked through your background as you were taking a shot, and that's the one that you want to use, it's very easy now to remove that with one click and get a very solid, very believable result. So AI in terms of photography has made me much more efficient. And I've already prided myself on being able to turn around clients' photos very quickly. And now being able to do that even faster, I think has made me just that much more valuable. So I think AI also it's one of those things where I think it is just going to become bigger and more powerful, and I don't want to be left behind. So I want to stay up to date with what's going on. I want to learn the programs that are going on or being used now, just in preparation for the next iteration that does, who knows what. So I appreciate what it is. I appreciate how it helps me. I appreciate that it has certain limitations, and I think I understand those. So that's where I land on AI. But thank you for watching. Thank you for taking the time. I hope that you found this interesting. This was very challenging for me to kind of distill 25 years of career work into a little over an hour presentation. So I hope you found it inspiring. If you're an artist, just get out there and keep creating. Thank you so much.